Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, August 9th, another edition of One True Sport Daily here on the One True Sport YouTube channel. I am your host, Ryan Droste of the Top Rope Nation podcast, and it's our last day of the week with a rotating guest host today. You know, Zach Haydorn, he's been out all week, so I've had the rotating chair next to me and had some great times with some great guests, and we got another fun one today. I would like to welcome Scott Mason from the Play Like a Jet podcast. Scott, how's it going this morning?
Hey, Ryan, I appreciate the invite, man. Listen, as much as I love talking about the Jets, and you kind of have to do a show 7 days a week about any topic, right? It's nice to be able to talk about something else too, especially pro wrestling, which I've been an enormous fan of since the 80s. You and I were talking before we jumped on about Kevin Sullivan, who we're going to talk about a little bit later, and all the classic wrestling. So between that and all the good stuff that's going on right now, I got to be honest, man, I'm looking forward to diving in on this, because between what WWE is doing, TNA has been really good. I've been getting back into them. MLW's been really good. There's so much good wrestling on right now. It feels like the most fun time to be a wrestling fan in a really long time, because we both know there have been periods, especially, I'm not trying to kick a guy when he's down, but when Vince McMahon was running things the last bunch of years, it was just so tough to watch. So it's great to be able to talk about this stuff now and really enjoy it.
Dude, I couldn't agree more. That when I started our podcast, Top Rope Nation, in 2016, things got dire pretty fast. It was tough watching pro wrestling there for a few years, and then you get the birth of AEW. The indies were really kind of catching fire again. WWE as the creative change, WWE catches fire. It's way more fun to talk about right now than it was, say, in 2018. So it's always fun on this daily show to kind of hit the big topics in the news. Yeah, you said it. We're going to talk about Kevin Sullivan, who's got some connections to our channel, actually, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. We're going to preview SmackDown tonight and everything scheduled for the fallout from SummerSlam on the Blue brand. Before we do, guys, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, you need to make sure you subscribe, hit the like button. We would really, really appreciate that. It helps our show in the algorithm a lot. You can become a member of One True Sport by going to onetruesport.com. Got all kinds of great benefits, getting you exclusive access to some of the biggest legends in the history of professional wrestling. People like Kurt Angle and Rob Van Dam, people like Arn Anderson, who you saw at SummerSlam. All these guys are right here, members of the One True Sport family. And if you want to support me, you can check out my podcast. As I said, Top Rope Nation. We had our live show, our weekly live show last night. There's a link to it in the broadcast description. Really fun time with my co-hosts, Justin and Jesse. I think you'll like it if you like One True Sport Daily. And of course, check out Scott's show. We'll let him promote that at the end of the podcast, but it's Play Like a Jet, New York Jets podcast. So if you want to support us, by the way, you see the scroll going at the bottom of the screen. The super chat function is open. That is the number one way to get involved, to support us here on the show directly, and to make sure your comments get featured in the show. So would really appreciate those super chats if you guys are out there watching and want to get more involved with the show today. And Scott, you mentioned Kevin Sullivan. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't start there, because Kevin Sullivan is one of the biggest legends in wrestling, who tragically has passed away at the age of 74. And he's been battling health problems for a while now. But if you have been a wrestling fan for any length of time, especially in the 90s and the 80s, you've probably heard of Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster, the Prince of Darkness. Even before that, his time down in Florida, his time in the booking room, legendary feuds on air, the whole situation with Brian Pillman. And as I said, also, he's a guy connected to our channel. I wanted to read a tweet from one of our founders here of One True Sport, Mr. Paul Bromwell, who tweeted out this morning. I'm just going to read it. Quote, "I'm saddened by the loss of my friend Kevin Sullivan. So grateful for the time I had talking with him both on and off the air. He loved his wife, Linda, his family, wrestling, baseball, and had a passion for history. Thank you for touching my life, Kevin. You'll always be remembered." And as you see, there's Paul co-hosting Tuesdays with the Taskmaster in the past here. So I definitely want to mention Paul, who's kind of the guy that runs the ship along with Dom and Marcus around here. So any thoughts on Kevin Sullivan, Scott, being a long time wrestling fan?
Ryan, I could do hours just talking about Kevin Sullivan. I won't, because I don't think anybody wants to hear that. But he was, like you said, in so many ways, just an incredibly important presence in wrestling, from being that demonic heel in Florida. And he was so convincing that so many people to this day believe that he actually was a devil worshiper. And you heard all weird conspiracy theories. I won't get into it, but about him and he who shall not be named, right? And all that stuff. There's all kinds of weird conspiracies floating on the internet, and it all stems back to that gimmick he did in Florida as the devil worshiper, and how everybody really bought into that. It's that old saying in wrestling, right? I can't make them believe wrestling's real, but I can make them believe I'm real. And he made people believe he was real. But I think a lot of his legacy is, as you mentioned, in the booking room. People forget that he was the head booker during the time period where WCW was killing WWE in the ratings, or WWF at the time. For almost 2 years, they were dominating ratings, and Kevin Sullivan was the head booker at that time. The thing that's great about him is he's one of these guys, like, you know, you have this in a lot of industries where you'll hear an interview with somebody who's an expert, you know, whether it's a guy who is a baseball player or a baseball manager or whatever. But a lot of times they talk and it's a little too technical and you kind of get lost and you don't really understand what they're saying. Kevin Sullivan was so great at explaining things, at walking you through the logic of stuff. And he remembered everything too. I would listen to shoot interviews with him that would be 2-3 hours and it would go by so quickly. And I remember I used to laugh because he did on MLW at one point, MLW Radio, the old MLW. He used to do a weekly podcast with MSL. And he used to talk all the time. He would compare wrestling to the circus. And it always made me laugh because my friend and I used to do the impression of Sullivan. And forgive me if this is not the best impression, but he'd be like, wrestling is like the circus, brother. If you don't like the sword swallower, here come the fire eaters. And if you don't like the fire eaters, here come the clowns in the small car. So he would talk like that. Or the other thing that he would talk about that we used to laugh all the time was, what you have to understand, brother, is that Hulk Hogan had complete creative control. I remember he's talking about, why did Ric Flair job to Hulk Hogan 65 times in a row? And he's like, yeah, because, brother, Hulk Hogan had complete creative control. So if he wanted the ending of the match to be Ric Flair crawling on his belly, barking like a dog, and rolling over to get pinned for the 1, 2, 3, that's what would have happened, brother. But you listen to his shoot interviews, and it's incredible because he explains so much about not just the logic of little storylines and matches and all that, but also there's one particular that I want to recommend. I think it might be up on YouTube or something, but Sean Oliver, who I think is one of the best in the genre, if not the best when it comes to this stuff. He had him on for something that was called, I think, The Last Days of WCW is what he called it. It was 2 hours. Sullivan just sort of went through everything. But him explaining, well, this guy had this in his contract, and this guy only had 80 days, and this guy wouldn't work with this guy. And it really puts in perspective how people like you and me, Ryan, we may think we know a lot about wrestling, and we probably do when it comes to the average person, right? But someone like Kevin Sullivan not only is on a level that we could never get to, but he also is somebody that explains, and this is part of the problem you're seeing now, I think, in AEW, is that you can have whatever booking ideas on paper and all of that, but ultimately you've got to be able to deal with the actual human beings. It's not just something in the abstract. You got to be able to deal with the human beings. You've got to be able to control the locker room. You've got to know how to get talent to do certain things. And that's an enormous part of running a wrestling company, being a booker and all that. And there's so many times when somebody would ask him a question and he would lay things out in a way that I had never thought of them before. But I loved watching his shoot interviews, listening to his shoot interviews. I felt like I was absorbing so much knowledge. he's one of those guys that legitimately I could listen to for hours and hours with no interruption. I always joke, and unfortunately I'll never get the chance, but I always joke with my friend Sean that I would love to just sit down and hang out with Kevin Sullivan and just have him tell me stories about booking, about wrestling, whatever, for however long he was willing to talk to me. He's one of those guys, and I think the wrestling world lost one of its true geniuses, unfortunately. 74 years old. It was very sad. I knew he was sick, but to see that he passed away really made me sad. He had so much of an impact, even on ECW. People don't realize the connection between him and Paul Heyman and how much he helped Paul Heyman and all of that. And even if you read Todd Gordon's book, Kevin Sullivan even helped Todd Gordon quite a bit before Heyman even came in there and was really taking control. So not to talk too much about it, but like I told you with Kevin Sullivan, I could just go on and on. I have so much love and admiration for what he did for the wrestling business and all the things that he shared with us that he didn't have to. There are a lot of these guys that don't share their wisdom and their knowledge with fans, but the impression I got, and I never met him, but Paul probably would be able to speak to this better than I ever could. He really seemed like the kind of guy who actually enjoyed talking to fans and sharing his wisdom with them, which is really awesome because a lot of these guys just see fans as, oh, can I make a few bucks selling an 8x10 or a shirt or whatever? And I never got that impression from Kevin Sullivan. And maybe he was different when he was an active wrestler. Maybe he was different when he was the booker. But at least in the last bunch of years, he really came across as a guy who truly enjoyed sharing this stuff with us. And I'll always be appreciative to him for that.
Yeah, man, super well said. Yeah, when you talk about the idea of managing egos in the locker room, right when you said that, I'm thinking back to that WCW locker room. And I mean, can you imagine a harder locker room to try to help, especially at being on the creative team and trying to satisfy all those egos? Like, yeah, there's the Hogan issue that you mentioned. Well, you didn't really have any say with Hulk Hogan. It was in his contract. He basically did whatever the hell he wanted. But like, yeah, trying to, he had enemies in the locker room, certainly had big fans in the locker room. How could you not in that place? And then, him being on the booking committee. And then, they bring in eventually towards the dying days there, Vince Russo. And I mean, he just destroyed the place. And then after that, they made Sullivan head booker. And it's like, could anyone have rescued that company in the dire strait that it was in at that moment in time? I don't really think so. So, I mean, yeah, he was a brilliant mind. You said it. I've listened to shoot interviews with him too, and I mean, you can learn so much just from listening to a guy like that with a history like that. A guy who transcended, the old territorial days in the 70s when he started, all the way up until the 2000s, really, and in the modern wrestling world. And yeah, I mean, you think of some of these gimmicks we've had, dark gimmicks, obviously Undertaker and stuff that like Bray Wyatt did. And I mean, he was one of the originals down there in Florida with that Prince of Darkness gimmick. And like you said, everyone thought he was really a devil worshiper. And that was the big controversy at the time. And I mean, of course, there's the Dungeon of Doom in WCW. And yeah, I mean, it always seemed like he was a guy who wanted to give back and to help kind of pass on that knowledge to people. And, like through Paul's show and other podcasts that he did and all the interviews and everything. So it's a big loss for the industry because people like that, you can learn an awful lot from to help this industry succeed. And, a legend that will not soon be forgotten. That is for sure. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of content on our channel dropping because some of our guys work directly with Kevin Sullivan. So you guys are going to want to stay tuned to the channel for that. I'm sure Paul's going to put out something at some point in time. And that will definitely be something that you want to make sure to tune into. So rest in peace, Kevin Sullivan, a legend of the wrestling business. No question about it.
And Ryan, to jump in real quick and just say there's a tie-in to current day WWE in a big way. Because if you'll recall, when he was first getting on the map, a young Luis Martinez, who was known as Punishment Martinez at the time, doing angles in Ring of Honor and learning under Kevin Sullivan. If you remember, he was doing that dark gimmick. I forget the name of the faction that he had, but it was like BJ Whitmer and Punishment Martinez and all that. And look at what's become of another one of Kevin Sullivan's proteges. Right now, he's one of the biggest stars in wrestling on the Raw brand as Damian Priest. So just to cap it all off, his legacy lives on, and it will live on in the wrestling business for, forever, because he's touched so many aspects of wrestling. And like I said, even to this day, looking at a guy who's a bona fide main eventer in WWE, you can trace it back, at least in part, to the work he did with Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah, great callback. Yeah, I mean, Damian Priest, Punishment Martinez, I've been a big fan of his ever since ROH, and he has really, really turned it around here, recently with them putting the title on him. And it was, I don't think, a spot that was set up for him to succeed, given where the rest of the Raw brand was. And he really grew into that character and has become one of the top couple of guys on that brand. And I think he's earned himself another title run down the line, no question about it. We're going to talk mostly SmackDown today, though, because we got SmackDown coming up tonight, and they don't have a single match announced for this show. They do have a lot of people announced to be on the show. So Reigns is going to be there tonight. He'll be on the show. That's officially announced. Cody's going to be on the show. LA Knight, the new U.S. champion. AJ Styles, Nia Jax, their new women's champion. She's going to have a championship celebration. So they have those 5 people confirmed to appear, but no matches as of this morning, at least. Maybe they'll announce something this afternoon if they haven't already. Let me ask you your thoughts on coming out of SummerSlam and what we might see for Roman and then Cody as well, because I personally feel like Cody is in a real bad spot right now. I mean, not monetarily or not in star power, certainly, but creatively. I think that, Cody Rhodes they just really haven't had anything for him to sink his teeth into as champion when it comes to feuds. He's kind of been playing second fiddle to other things on the show. And I think with Roman back, that's going to continue. Roman's going to come out tonight, I'm sure, go after Solo and a promo. What do you foresee happening with Roman Reigns tonight, and how excited were you to see him come back?
Well, it was fun to watch him come back, although it's not like there was any suspense because we all knew what was coming. Everybody's known for a while that this is when he was going to come back. And then also they made it Bloodline rules. And that was part of the problem in the match, right? People were sitting on their hands just kind of waiting, like, when is Roman going to show up? When is the outside interference going to start? But I think with Roman and Cody, it's kind of interesting, right? Because with Cody, it seems like, reading the tea leaves, what they're doing is just biding their time until The Rock comes back, and probably, I guess, WrestleMania, I assume the plan, if he's willing to still willing to do it, is Cody and The Rock at WrestleMania. So it's, how do you get to that point? And then with Roman, it's one of those things where you have to figure out, how do you string this Bloodline thing along? Where are the twists and turns? Do we get Jay and Jimmy Uso coming back to side with Roman? If they do a War Games, what ends up happening there? Do we see Sami Zayn as the 4th member of Team OG Bloodline? Like, they have to start really setting that stuff up. Also, are we going to see the return of Paul Heyman with Roman Reigns? I'm not sure exactly. I think with Roman, it's pretty clear the direction, at least for now. It's Solo and those guys, and it's just a matter of how long does that play out. Like you said with Cody, it's interesting. He's selling a ton of merchandise. He's their top ticket seller. He's the top baby face in the industry right now. I don't think there's any way around that. And Roman is there too. The only reason I'm not saying is because he had been gone for months and all of that. But what do you do with Cody now if he's not going to be involved in the Bloodline thing? Who does he end up feuding with? Who's the heel that's hot enough to give him programs? Because AJ Styles was a fine first program, I think. Even though AJ Styles hasn't exactly been on fire from a win-loss standpoint in a while, he's a guy that you knew could go in there with Cody, put on banger matches, make Cody look great, and help further legitimize his title reign. But like you said, they're in a weird spot because who's the next heel? Now, everybody's theorizing that at some point Randy Orton is going to turn and it'll be Randy Orton, but he's busy with Gunther right now. I don't know how long that's going to go on. where does this go? So it's interesting. And I will say this, whereas in my mind, I'm not entirely sure where they go next with Cody. I feel like Triple H, Paul Heyman, Michael Hayes, who to my understanding are the three guys that are mainly responsible for the creative direction, and especially with the main event level stuff with Heyman and all that, they've earned, I think, the benefit of the doubt, because there have been so many times where, as good as I think they've done, as well as they've done, I've sat here and said, I'm not sure where they're going, or I disagreed with something, and they ended up being right. And I'm like, okay, well, this is why they are where they are. And I'm sitting here watching the product as a fan. As one example, how many of us thought once Cody lost at WrestleMania last year that was it? It's over. You missed your chance, right? But they kept him hot. They found a way to make him even hotter heading into the second time. And it was an even bigger deal when he finally won. I didn't think they'd be able to keep that momentum going. I'll be honest. I thought they should have put the title on Sami Zayn when he was piping hot. And it turned out, obviously, that they made the right call with Cody and all that. So I'm very curious to see where they go, and I'm excited to watch what they have in store. The thing that's beautiful about it is, though, it's like when I used to watch ECW back in the heyday. You weren't always sure where they were going, but you were pretty confident that they were going to find a way to make you enjoy what it is that they came up with. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I don't know what they're going to do with Cody. I assume we'll start to see seeds of it on the show tonight. With Roman, we sort of know where they're going, but what's the direction? Like, how will they get there? There's been little wrinkles that we wouldn't have foreseen. There's been different twists and turns that were very clever that helped keep this thing going longer and longer. So I'm very interested to watch. I will say real quickly, I don't know, and I don't think anybody does, what the story is with Jacob Fatu, if that's a real injury, if it's a work or whatever. And that's kind of cool. It's nice to have that era of uncertainty in an era of everything being reported openly on the internet, right? But I like the fact that whether it was on purpose or by accident, he didn't face off with Roman Reigns, because as this Bloodline storyline progresses, I would like to see a build to that, because I think it's pretty clear that even though Solo is the leader of the new Bloodline or whatever, Jacob Fatu is the guy there. I mean, it couldn't be more clear. You watch him for 2 seconds, and I will say, as somebody who's watched Jacob Fatu for several years, I mean, I've been in live crowds where I was at most 5-10 feet away from the guy watching him do stuff. He is absolutely incredible. The stuff he can do for a guy his size, but also how real he is. Like I said before with Kevin Sullivan, I can't make you believe wrestling's real, but I can make you believe I'm real. Who looks at Jacob Fatu and doesn't go, man, this guy would go out on the street and just beat somebody down if they even looked at him the wrong way, right? And I'm sure Jacob's a really nice guy in real life, so whatever. But the point is, he just has that presence about him. He has that aura about him. You can 100% see that whether WWE is planning for this or not, and I think they probably are, because they understand this, I'm sure. Jacob Fatu and Roman Reigns is where the real money is, not Solo Sikoa and Roman Reigns. So how do they navigate this storyline and eventually get to Roman and Jacob? Because I think when those two finally face off, it's going to be one of those ooh moments. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, I've been saying that for weeks. I am right with you. That, I mean, you watch Jacob and he jumps off the screen. The charisma that guy has, the look he has, the athleticism he has. He's clearly the guy that they got to get to eventually. And so, I mean, I think that's what everyone's going to be waiting for. I was not a huge fan of Solo Sikoa getting that match at SummerSlam. I was very vocal about that just because I didn't buy it as a fan. I mean, I think that Solo's done fine in the past as the enforcer in the group when they were booking him strong, but they just hadn't booked him strong in a long time. And I'm not saying that Jacob Fatu should have been in the match this early. I don't think that either. It was just Solo was hard to buy in that match for me. And like you said, everybody knew Roman was coming back. I enjoyed SummerSlam. I thought it was like a slightly above average show. I actually thought Raw was better than SummerSlam. SummerSlam was an incredibly predictable show. Like, I don't know if there's been a pay-per-view or PLE where I predicted every single match result like SummerSlam in a while. It was a very predictable card. That's not always bad. Sometimes that just means the writing's really good. But I think it's interesting to your point about, Roman and the heel babyface dynamics with Cody and everything, that, historically the McMahon company and now Hunter running creative that's been a babyface territory. That being in the New York area, it was always carried by babyfaces. And yet since Hunter took over, they've had a really hard time booking the babyface champions creatively, at least. Like, once they get there, like Cody, okay, now what do we do now? It's been very strong at booking heel champions. Roman, most of the time, it was on fumes towards the end there, but and the other side, I guess you look at Raw, when Rollins was a champ, it was fine, I guess. They gave it to Damian and he was a heel at first. Then they turned him. And when they turned him, he grew into that role and became a decent babyface champion. But Gunther having that title makes so much sense because there are so many top tier baby faces for him to work with. Raw is loaded with them. You can have Rollins, you can have Punk go after the title eventually. Over here on SmackDown, that would be a criticism I have, is they haven't laid the groundwork for Cody to really have top tier feuds because they haven't built up the heel side very strongly to get ready for that. I do think the Orton thing is going to happen in the fall. I think that, they're doing the match with Gunther over there at Bash at Berlin. They've got the history with the messed up finish, at King of the Ring. So they can do one match. I don't think that's going to be a series of matches. I think they'll do the one match. Orton will go back to SmackDown. And then eventually him and Cody will probably have a multiple month-long story going while the Bloodline is doing their thing before, as you mentioned, you get Rock back and then you set up that eventual match. But I mean, yeah, Cody is just, these feuds have just felt very stopgap. Like the AJ feud you mentioned, it was fine. They had good matches, but there just wasn't a lot to it. Solo, nobody bought it. Nobody thought in a million years he was going to win the world title. And now Cody's he's definitely going to be playing second fiddle to Roman and the Bloodline story. And so hopefully they got some stuff lined up for him. He's going to continue selling a ton of merch and everything. I would just like to see more creatively for him moving forward. And I really do think that that's going to be Orton. So yeah, I'm just catching up on the chat here. Talking about Jacob Fatu's injury. Yeah, I think there's a little of both happening there. Cause I'd heard that he was supposed to sell the leg after that spot, that was always planned, but that he did really tweak something and he was really hurt at least a little bit. I don't think that it's a serious injury though. I think he's going to be good to go, whether it's in, this week or in a few weeks. It's not a kind of thing that's going to keep him out long term. So hopefully they dodged a bullet there, I believe. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, Solo, Andrew saying Solo was only for the story. Yeah, but I mean, that's the problem, because to me, your babyface world champion, the biggest star in the company, should be the story. And I just not a fan of like him wrestling a guy who has no chance to win. And it's all about Roman, who I like, but like, give me something for Cody too. He's the world champion. And that's where they've been a little bit lackluster and creative, I think, in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to Dutch Mantel has talked about this before. The idea is you figure out where you want to go and then you work backwards, right? So let's say you want to get to Rock and Cody at WrestleMania. What do you have planned in between? How do you get to Rock and Cody? And so I think like the super chat said, a lot of that Solo stuff was for the story. And as you said, Ryan, I'm sort of two minds on this. Yeah, everybody knew he wasn't going to win Solo, but it's not like anybody thought that AJ Styles was going to win either. That was just a nice first program to get his feet wet and all of that. I think with Solo, the key there was to sort of plant the seeds for a Cody Roman thing down the line, where Roman kind of nods his head as if to say, I respect you, but some point down the line, I'll be coming back for my title or whatever. So who knows when that could be 2 years down the line or whatever. And also, I still think they're planting breadcrumbs with Solo that might actually involve Cody in the end, because I think, at least to me, it's pretty clear that we're going to find out that the real leader of the new bloodline is not Solo. It's been The Rock pulling the strings the whole time. And then we're going to get that dynamic play out. So I'm not sure exactly what that does with Cody. And as you said, I think the big program to hold them over until WrestleMania, when I presume it'll be The Rock and Cody, would be Randy Orton turning heel. You know what's interesting about Randy Orton too? You were talking about Orton and Gunther and all that. And my friend Sean and I were discussing this the other day. It's really amazing how WWE keeps getting handed these lemons and turning them into delicious lemonade, right? So CM Punk gets hurt at the Royal Rumble. Oh my God, this is terrible. It just ruined the WrestleMania main event, right? It leads to the hottest program in the company with CM Punk and Drew McIntyre. They found a way to take that and turn it into something really awesome and successful. Oh no, Rhea Ripley's hurt. Just lost their biggest female star. They took that and found a way to make that Dom Liv Rhea storyline, and you saw the reaction at SummerSlam and especially on Monday at Raw in Baltimore. The fans are really into that, and I think you can make a case that Rhea Ripley is the biggest star in the company after Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes at this point. Fans are absolutely gaga over her. So that's another one where it was like, oh no, she's gone. And look at what they did. She came out even bigger, stronger. That angle is done huge. And then you look now also at the Randy Orton Gunther thing where the referee messed up. Oh no, what did they do? This is this big controversy. Well, guess what? Now it handed them a perfect explanation for this title match in Germany with Gunther and Randy Orton, because otherwise, well, he beat him fair and square. What's the need for a rematch? But Orton's shoulder was up. So that mess up leads to, it's just amazing how WWE will keep having these negatives and turning them into positives. I got to say on Gunther too, and this is where, like you said, I'm very curious to see what they do with Cody, and I'm not sure. But with Gunther, there's so many directions, and I love that character because we've watched wrestling a long time, so we know all the different kinds of heels. Gunther is a throwback to the old school heel. He's more like that badass heel who doesn't need to cheat. He doesn't need outside interference. He's a jerk, but he'll fight anybody. He really is. And I know The Rock co-opted this term, but he really does have that final boss thing. Like he feels like if you ever fought in Street Fighter 2, if you remember like M. Bison in Street Fighter 2 or Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat, right? That final boss, that last badass that you got to beat, that there's a reason this guy is on top. And it's not like Roman Reigns, don't get me wrong, badass and all that, whatever. But every match it was, oh, he's in trouble and now his family's going to come out and save him. Gunther, it's just this dude is going to whack you and whack you and whack you until you can't take it anymore. And then he's going to stand over you like a cocky jerk and tell you how he's better than you and all of that. So I love that. And I think it's awesome. I think Gunther is just one of the best things in wrestling right now. He's so good at what he does. And I'll tell you, man, just thinking about what it could have been like watching him in different eras too. Like imagine him having matches with a prime Bret Hart or having
that's what I was thinking.
Guys like that, or even in Japan, if he had gone over there as like a mega heel and had matches with guys like Kenta Kobashi or whatever.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right? How amazing would that have been? There's Dr. Death, Steve Williams, all that. So he's just a guy that is a throwback to another era, but they're really making it work. And I love what they're doing with him. So him as champion should be a lot of fun. I hope he holds that thing for a long time. And it's funny because that was another one, his predictable result. We all knew he was getting the title, but number one, I think everybody was happy to see it. I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people that really enjoy this stuff were happy to see it. And also, like you said, and this is kind of one of those like, wow, I can't believe WWE took something unexpected and turned it into something really good. Like, look at Damian Priest. When he got the Money in the Bank briefcase, a lot of us, including me, were like, really, why? Damian Priest? I guess they're setting something up with Finn Balor. That's the only thing I can think of, right? But yes, love that. Bam Bam Gordy. That's awesome. That's although obviously much more slender, But yeah, I could totally see that. But it's funny because you look at it and you see something with Damian Priest where I don't know that they had any designs on this guy really becoming a legitimate main event caliber guy. They gave him the briefcase. I thought it was probably going to lead to something with Balor, which it eventually did. But he got over in a way that I certainly was never expecting, especially when he was starting to turn babyface. The crowd really took to him. And you can say what you want to, but we all saw SummerSlam, the reaction he was getting. We all saw Raw. Dude, the reaction that him and Rhea Ripley got on Raw for that segment.
Yeah.
The best reactions, heel or babyface, that we've seen from anybody this year. So it's crazy that they've been able to put together a roster where there are all these guys that are now believable in these spots, and Gunther will have a fun time going, challenger to challenger to challenger. Different story on SmackDown, like we said with Cody. They'll have to figure that out, but Gunther and all that will be fun. And even Braun Breaker with that Intercontinental title is going to be a lot of fun. And I love the fact that Braun Breaker slowly but surely starting to develop as a promo and as a personality. You're starting to see it more and more. And I have to imagine that a lot of that is because he's been working closely with Paul Heyman, who is an absolute all-time genius along the lines of the unfortunately now departed Mr. Sullivan. So there's so much cool stuff going on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they have in store tonight on SmackDown. I should also say, too, by the way, that when it comes to all the characters that have been developing, like Braun Breaker and all of that, it's so fun to finally watch these younger, and look, Damian Priest is not young, but I should say fresher talents finally getting a crack, which is something that Vince McMahon would always refuse to do. He would maybe give a guy a chance for 2 seconds and then it wouldn't work out immediately. So then he would go back to John Cena or whoever else it was, Brock Lesnar. So it's nice to see that Triple H is willing to do things like this. By the way, quick thing that has nothing to do with anything, but just on the subject of Braun Breaker, one of the best things I saw from SummerSlam weekend was Rick Steiner, Scott Steiner, DDP sitting in that box together, the Legends box, watching Braun Breaker win the Intercontinental title. I know that Rick Steiner doesn't have the best reputation because he's known as a bit of a bully during his day and all that. But it was, you could tell he really loves and is so proud of his son. And he was genuinely so happy. And Scotty too, from what you hear, he's very close with his nephews. It was nice to see that moment where they could watch this kid continue their legacy.
A couple of my good friends were in the box right next to those guys at SummerSlam, and they kept sending me pictures of them and how they were reacting to the different matches. I'm like, what? You're in the box next to the Steiners? They're like, yeah, oh, DDP just walked in too. And he's sending me all this stuff. I'm like, it was crazy. I'm like, oh, what are they thinking of this match? He'd send me a picture. That was pretty funny stuff. But yeah, real quick before we go, I wanted to say the point you were making about Vince and how he would give up with people. I don't think he ever in a million years would have allowed Damian to grow into that role like he did. Because the first couple of months, it was really blah. He didn't feel like a world champion. He would have pivoted, I think. And as you said, Damian Priest is one of the best things on Raw right now. He really, and I was as skeptical as anybody. When he first won it, I'm like, man, I don't know about this. He grew into that role and had to shift from being a heel to a babyface and did it. And now he's one of the most popular guys on the show. I mean, so yeah, all credit to him. And honestly, Raw's my favorite of the two shows to watch right now, which definitely wasn't the case over the last few years. And I'm kind of surprised I'm saying that, but I actually prefer Raw to SmackDown right now. SmackDown, we'll see what happens tonight. It will be great to see Roman back. We'll be talking about all of it Monday. Zach will be back with me. Break it all down on Monday. Man, this has been a great discussion, Scott. We've got to get you on Top Rope Nation, maybe back here on One True Sport as well in the future. Been a lot of fun. Glad you can join us. Tell us what you got going on with the football podcast.
Well, first of all, Ryan, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'd love to come on anytime. It was awesome talking to you, and I love talking about this stuff. So especially the opportunity to talk about classic Florida Championship Wrestling with Kevin Sullivan. Unfortunately, bad reason that we had to talk about it, but it's great to talk about that stuff. Anybody who is into football, and I'm sure plenty of you are, you can check out my podcast, Play Like a Jet. Even if you're not a Jets fan, you may enjoy it. Come for the Jets talk and stay for the occasional wrestling references. I actually made a reference to the Killer Bees the other day, if you remember,
nice.
Jim Brunzell and B. Brian Blair, because Will McDonald, not Will McDonald, Brees Hall, who you know very well as a former Iowa State player, he said that he's calling him and Braylon Allen the Killer Bees, the running back that the Jets drafted this past year out of Wisconsin. They're calling themselves the Killer Bees. And I said on the show, all due respect, there's only one Killer Bees, and it's Jumpin' Jim Brunzell and Brian Blair. And then, of course, I referenced the late Iron Sheik, R.I.P., and F the B, Brian Blair, all that stuff. But so even if you're not a Jets fan, you're going to get some wrestling references on the show. People always laugh about that. Pizza references too, because we are a New York-based podcast. But 7 days a week, brand new shows, rain or shine, no matter what. It's insane. I don't know how I do it. I probably should be in a straitjacket at this point, Ryan, talking about the Jets 7 days a week. But we cover it from all angles. Right now, we're doing training camp, so we're doing daily training camp reports. So one of the beat reporters will come on. We'll review that day's training camp practice. And so this is a good way for you to really get in the weeds and understand exactly what's going on with the Jets. But then even during the regular season, if you're a fan of another team that's going to play the Jets, it's never a bad thing to have intel and all of that. So Play Like a Jet, all your favorite podcast apps. I'm at Play Like a Jet 1 on Twitter. And it's 7 days a week, 365 days a year, except leap year. Then leap year, the days are a little bit different. But again, Ryan, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and really had a blast. Looking forward to doing it again with you, either here, Top Rope Nation, anywhere you want. If you want, we'll grab a bullhorn and just have a conversation on the street. That's cool with me too.
I love it. I love that Killer Bees reference, dude, because where I live here is where the Tragos Thez Hall of Fame is. And Brian Blair is here like every single year. Just saw him a couple of weeks ago. So great. I loved them as a kid too. It's surreal to just be walking around downtown and like, oh, there's Brian Blair again, just passing me here every single year. Brunzell's been here too. So yeah, it's great reference. Check out his podcast, you guys, for the football talk. Absolutely. We'll be reconnecting down the line. And after you get done tuning in here, again, check the link in the description for last night's edition of Top Rope Nation. Check it out. Had a lot of laughs, lots of great feedback on that show. We talked about WWE, AEW. Then we went down a weird Corey Feldman rabbit hole that came out of nowhere and discovered some things about Corey Feldman and pro wrestling and Bret Hart and a movie that was once pitched. Very, very bizarre conversation on Top Rope Nation last night. You'll laugh. Check it out, you guys. I'll be back here on Monday with Zach. You can tune in then. Of course, subscribe to One True Sport while you're here. And we hope everybody has a good weekend. We'll see you all on Monday. Take care.